Filozofija nauke se bavi kritičkim ispitivanjem nauke, njenih metoda i rezultata. Kao posebna disciplina, zvanično se pojavljuje u prvoj polovini 20. veka, kada su već posebne nauke bile odvojene od filozofije. O najnovijim trendovima u filozofiji nauke razgovaralo se ove jeseni u Beogradu na konferenciji Evropske asocijacije za filozofiju nauke. Međunarodni skup koji okuplja najeminentnije evropske istraživače iz ove oblasti održava se svake druge godine, a Beograd je prvi grad Istočne Evrope u kome je organizovan. Konferencija je održana u Kolarčevoj zadužbini, a okupila je oko 300 učesnika.
Sama EPSA konferencija je najveća konferencija u Evropi iz filozofije nauke i parira samo jednoj drugoj koja se dešava u Americi i stalno je to takmičenje koja će biti bolja. EPSA, osim što organizuje konferencije, takođe ima i prestižan časopis na Špringerovoj listi i Špringer je jedan od sponzora ove konferencije i tu su došli i bili su prisutni, što takođe našim istraživačima iz oblasti humanistike sigurno može pomoći jer želimo da oni što više internacionalno objavljuju i nadam se da će ovo biti jedna motivacija za sve, da mi možemo da postignemo takve uspehe, da možemo da budemo na tom nivou i da nastavimo da idemo u tom pravcu.
Ovo je sve bilo uzbudljivo i novo, pogotovo što smo, kako su nam kasnije rekli, mi smo najmoćniji tim ikada koji je dobio priliku da organizuje EPS-u. Oni imaju te konkurse gde se prijavljuju ljudi sa različitih instituta, univerziteta iz različitih gradova i mi smo se prijavili da vidimo jer smo mislili to je sjajna prilika da dođe konferencija tog ranga u Srbiju i onda su nas oni kontaktirali i rekli da im se jako sviđa naša ponuda. Lokalni organizacioni odbor broji ljude koji nisu samo iz Beograda i koji nisu samo sa Filozofskog fakulteta, nego su to mladi ljudi i sa drugih univerziteta u Nišu i iz dijaspore i eto tako, to je u suštini jedan udruženi projekat više mladih naučnika i istraživača iz Srbije i dijaspore.
Mislim da je ovo jedan veliki događaj za filozofske, akademske i opšte naučne krugove u Srbiji. Ovo je događaj koji se održava na svake 2 godine i mi imamo čast da smo prvi grad i prva država iz Istočne Evrope koja je ugostila jednu ovako veliku prestižnu konferenciju. Mislim da je ovo stvarno jedna velika prilika i za naše istraživače i za naše naučnike da čuju neke vrlo ozbiljne i cenjene filozofe i naučnike, a takođe i prilika da ljudi iz Evrope, filozofi i naučnici budu u Beogradu, saznaju nešto više o Beogradu, saznaju da se ovdje dešavaju istraživanja u oblasti filozofije i filozofije nauke naročito i da će to zapravo može da doprinese značajno poboljšanju saradnje i da otvori neka nova vrata našim istraživačima za saradnju sa vodećim svetskim filozofima.
Doveli smo u Beograd oko 300 ljudi, najeminentnijih stručnjaka iz filozofije nauke. Tu treba imati u vidu da su neki od tih ljudi akademici, neki od njih posjeduju velike evropske projekte, odnosno vode velike evropske projekte. Radi se dakle o jednoj značajnoj kulturnoj i naučnoj razmeni koja se trenutno dešava kod nas.
Na konferenciji Evropske asocijacije za filozofiju nauke održan je veliki broj sesija i plenarnih predavanja, a neke od tema o kojima se govorilo su primjene naučnih istraživanja, filozofija kvantne teorije, transparentnost u farmaceutskim istraživanjima, etika i epistemologija, filozofija biologije. Među najzastupljenijim temama bile su filozofija veštačke inteligencije i filozofije biomedicinskih nauka. Veštačka inteligencija kao alat koji se može koristiti za postizanje znanja privlači veliku pažnju filozofa. Upravo oni mogu pomoći u određivanju pravca u kom veštačka inteligencija može i treba da se razvije.
First of all, it's about trying to understand what can AI do, what can it not do, so understanding the limits and the prospects of AI, but also, of course, to try to ensure that AI is used for the right things, right? That it's developed responsibly, that it's used to improve our lives, right, and not to hurt us. So what philosophers do is they think about the bigger questions, right? Like what is the good? What is good technology? What does it look like? How should it be developed? So philosophers try to ask those questions and then maybe answer them and help guide the development of AI. And very often engineers and scientists, they're concerned with the small problems, right? How to make the system faster, right, or more correct, or how to solve a particular problem. But which problems should you solve? Which problems maybe should you not solve, right? These are philosophical questions, right? And so philosophers are becoming more and more involved actually in the development of AI.
I think what causes a lot of worry in the general public is that AI might take decisions in our lives that we don't then seem to have any influence on because we don't understand the AIs sufficiently. And a major contribution that philosophers can make is look at how AI functions, both from the history of our shared philosophical history of how we can get knowledge in the first place, but also look at how AI functions in terms of what sort of role it plays in our decision making, and then clarify that role and maybe also curtail it or put constraints on it in a particular way.
U 21. veku filozofija ima sve veću ulogu i u biomedicinskim istraživanjima i medicinskim pitanjima. I to ne samo onim koje se odnose na etiku, već i na ontologiju fenomena.
Philosophy studies different kinds of concepts and methodological and ethical questions in medicine and medical research. So, just to give you one example, philosophers of medicine ask, what is a disease? So we tend to think that medicine should be treating diseases, and philosophers of medicine ask, okay, what is a disease? And that can help us sort out some controversial examples, like, is ADHD a disease? How should we be treating it? Philosophy of medicine is concerned with some metaphysical questions, some ethical questions, some political questions. One topic that I was just speaking about, what is disease, is kind of a metaphysical question about medicine. Another really important one is, what is death? So, we think that medicine is supposed to be trying to avoid death, and there's a very important question, what is death? So some people think death is the cessation of biological functioning, so it's bodily, whereas other people think death is somehow the loss of the person, which is a kind of metaphysical notion. That has ethical consequences. So if a person is dead when their biological functioning ends, that informs us about particular aspects of how we can treat them. Whereas if death involves the loss of a personhood, and that can happen independently of the loss of general biological functioning.
My current work mostly focuses on the philosophy of medicine part. I'm currently working on a project looking at decisions in public health and ethical and value-related questions and how those affect trust in science. And this is something that I think is important, especially in the light of what happened, for instance, during the pandemic and questions about the public understanding of science right now.
Važna tema ovogodišnje konferencije bila je naučna politika. Razgovaralo se o pitanjima kako da nauka bude kvalitetna u različitim delovima sveta, sa posebnim naglaskom na Evropu.
The East European Network for Philosophy of Science is a network that's been constituted by researchers in philosophy working in the region. We define Eastern Europe in the broadest kind of sense, so we're not so much geographically focused, and everyone can basically be a member. There's no membership fee, and the idea would be to bring together communities of philosophers working in the region.
We established the network which is called ENPS, which stands for East European Network for Philosophy of Science, which tries to connect the people from the region. So we have members actually from all over the world, but our focus is on the countries of former Yugoslavia, and then we also include Albania and Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, also the Baltic countries like Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, and also Russia. So and Turkey also. So we're covering quite large geographical region, and we see that this has been doing, I think, a good thing for us because the region is very heterogeneous. So Poland, for instance, has, I mean, it's a large country, so they have a large number of philosophers of science compared, for instance, to smaller countries like myself. I'm from Slovenia originally, so we only have 2 departments of philosophy, and I mean, not everybody is a philosopher of science, so it's really good that we have a way of connecting people.
Evropska asocijacija za filozofiju nauke EPSA teži promovisanju međunarodne, filozofske i naučne razmene na svim nivoima.
So EPSA was founded in 2007, so it's really a young knowledge society, because it was very important that we created a society to put together every country in Europe, not only Western Europe, but also Central and Eastern Europe. And so we have many activities, but the conference is certainly the most important activity we have at EPSA.
The European Philosophy of Science Association is the premier scholarly society that deals with philosophy of science in Europe. So it brings together people who do all sorts of different work in the field, and we gather every 2 years in different European countries, usually in capitals, to try and get together and exchange ideas about our research and update each other on what is going on.
The conference, the biennial conference, is the unique opportunity for the members of EPSA to get together and to share ideas, to share projects, but also it's a very nice way to foster collaborations between members of EPSA. And what's very important for EPSA is that it gives the opportunity to members coming from every country in Europe to get together. And so it was very important for us to have this conference for the first time in a country from Central or Eastern Europe, to be able to be as inclusive as possible and to get together as many people as possible from countries which it is maybe more difficult for them to go to other places in Europe. It is a very lively community, and the organization here was so nice. So when the organization of a conference is so professional and good, that tells something about people working in the field behind this event. So yeah, it was very nice to get to know people from this country.
Filozofija nauke se bavi pitanjima šta je nauka, kako funkcioniše, zašto verujemo naučnicima, koje su primjene naučnog rada. Kao takva, danas je veoma dinamična i ima sve veću ulogu.
Many of the philosophers of science, like me, do actually quite a lot of work beyond academia. So we try to write as much as possible also for a variety of different audiences. We collaborate with different groups in the public, different types of experts. So in my work, for instance, when it faces medicine, I tend to also work with patient groups sometimes, or some of the work I'm doing in agricultural science, I work with farmer communities. And this is very important because that means that the work that we are creating is actually much more accessible to the general public in terms of helping to understand what is happening in science and technology at the moment. We all know it's very difficult to understand.
Philosophy of science nowadays is a field where philosophers look at science and try to understand science, how it works well, how it is applied, whether it is applied justifiably or in a correct way. And this is done by philosophers because philosophers have a long history of thinking about knowledge and about what it is to have knowledge and how knowledge can be applied in the right way.
U filozofiji nauke gledamo ne samo na uspjeh nauke, ali i na probleme nauke, i to poboljšava kritičku sposobnost.
Filozofi nauke danas imaju širok spektar istraživanja, pa se tako bave filozofijom fizike, biologije, medicine, psihologije, ali i ekonomije, pa čak i filozofijom klimatskih promjena.
A lot of the work I'm doing at the moment concerns the use of data and data models in the sciences. And of course, everybody is aware of the fact that data are very important these days. We produce data in everything we do every day, whenever we interact with our mobile phone, whenever we go shopping, whenever we go to the bank. We create a lot of data, and this data get harnessed and used for a variety of purposes by lots of different institutions. Some of those institutions are scientific institutions. So for instance, during the pandemic, a lot of public health institutions used data from social media and data from transport institutions, for instance, to try and understand better the patterns of transmission of the COVID-19 virus. So I'm looking at this phenomena and trying to understand how exactly we take all these different types of data, we integrate them, and sometimes we fail to integrate them, and we create knowledge based on this.
Well, basically in two ways. First, I studied psychology in addition to studying philosophy, so I think my direction is I'm very much interested in the actual things that psychologists do. And my other, I guess, orientation or direction is that I studied history and philosophy of science. I'm very interested in the way in which psychology developed, the way in which it kind of formed as a discipline. And I guess there's a third element, which is that, or maybe it's related to the first, I'm interested in the practice, and the practice includes experimental practices. I started being interested in it, I don't know, 25 years ago, and at the time there wasn't much philosophy of psychology. So it was many of the questions that were called questions in philosophy of psychology were actually questions in philosophy of mind. They were about mental causation, free will, those kinds of questions, mental content. And now, today, I would say there is actually more interest in psychology as a science that is practiced in psychology departments.
Recently, I'm doing a philosophy of science focused on political and societal dimension of science. I will just give you an example of topics. For instance, I'm working at the moment of what it means for scientists to get politically involved in public life, and to what extent these political commitments may enter in tension with usual expectation towards science, like neutrality, objectivity, or impartiality. So I'm working on that, for instance. I also work on research integrity, because in many countries, especially in my country, France, it's becoming a very public problem, research integrity. And I think philosophers of science have a lot of things to say about how to depart as less as possible from the good methodology in science, and also because it's a condition of trust of people towards science. And maybe I can add a last topic. I also work on what we call citizen science. So that's the idea that you're going to open the process of producing knowledge to non-professional inquirers, and there are many benefits for that, some also challenges, so I'm working also on this topic.
My specific field of work is in formal philosophy of science, which means that, I address questions in philosophy of science, like in general philosophy of science, so like what is scientific explanation, what is scientific confirmation, and so on. However, I do this by using mathematical methods. So I tend to use probability theory in doing this, and also computational methods. So computer simulations are then used to investigate, for instance, how one thing that I think is easy to show is, for instance, there's a question whether the fact that some hypothesis explains some evidence, does that mean that the hypothesis is more likely to be true? And this is impossible to research empirically. It's not impossible, it's very hard, but if you use computer simulations, then you can get a model, and then you can test whether this formal mathematical model tells you something about these very key questions of philosophy of science, which are explanation and truth and the relation between those concepts.
My research is really on the philosophy of science side. It's trying to develop tools in order to better to reach better decision when it comes to climate change. For instance, based on the outputs of climate models, how to tackle uncertainties and cases also with what is called high or deep uncertainties, where we don't exactly know what's going to happen in details. We have a big global picture, but when it comes to a specific region and so on. And I think philosophy of science can really provide very good tools in order, for instance, to manage these uncertainties and take the best decisions when it comes to, again, climate change. Philosophy and philosophy of science in particular can provide tools to climate scientists and the climate science community and the policymakers in order to better understand the possible consequences of climate change and to quantify the uncertainties. So I think it's a really relevant interaction between the two fields, between climate science on the one hand and the philosophy of science on the other hand. So I think it's a very interesting set of interactions and very useful for climate science when it comes to understanding climate change. I think it's very important for philosophy of science as well, in the sense that it's a way for philosophy of science to be explicitly socially relevant. So working on topics which are of social relevance for everybody, for the broader society, and I think this is very important for philosophy of science as well. Not only working on abstract topics, but also on socially relevant questions.
Ja se konkretno bavim filozofijom, metodologijom ekonomije, što je jedna oblast koja nije toliko zastupljena, nema toliko istraživača koji se bave time u Srbiji. Ono što je mene zanima to su neke metodološke specifičnosti ekonomije kao nauke. Naprimjer, jedna od osnovnih je to što ona je jedna pre svega neeksperimentalna nauka koja barata velikim brojem neeksperimentalnih podataka, a ipak mora da dođe do nekih zaključaka i tvrdnji i zakonitosti na koje će se kasnije oslanjati monetarne, fiskalne vlasti, političke vlasti da bi donosila odluke koje utiču na naše živote.
Ja se bavim filozofijom nauke i teorijom saznanja u najopštijem smislu. Upravo privodim kraju svoju doktorsku disertaciju koja se između ostalog i time bavi kako možemo znati da li su naučne teorije istinite ili su samo neke vrste aproksimacija koje nam pomažu da lakše sistematizujemo iskustvo koje nas okružuje. Tako da teme kojima se bave ljudi na ovoj konferenciji su negde i meni bliske. Takođe se odnedavno interesujem i za temu veštačke inteligencije, što je isto nešto što je ovde dosta pokriveno.
Mladi istraživači i studenti u Srbiji gaje sve veće interesovanje za filozofiju nauke. Tome u prilog govori i činjenica da su odlučili da ovako veliku međunarodnu konferenciju organizuju u Beogradu.
Rekao bih da filozofija nikada ne može da prestane da bude aktuelna. Osim toga što imam sreće da imam najdivnije saradnike i kolege ovde u Srbiji, mislim da i u svetu, koliko god da ljudi govorili da je filozofija prevaziđena, ona ne može da bude prevaziđena dok god mi imamo tu prirodnu znatiželju i interesovanje da upoznajemo svet oko sebe. Te teme se menjaju i sa novim tehnologijama se menja i uloga filozofije kada pričamo o pomenutoj veštačkoj inteligenciji ili o biomedicini koja se isto usavršava, filozofija to mora da isprati. I na taj način mislim da će ona uvek biti aktuelna. I zbog toga mislim da je ova konferencija odlična prilika i da podsjetimo skeptike da je filozofija uvek aktuelna, ali i da se predstavimo mi u svetu, da Srbija nije periferija naučnog napretka i društva, nego da itekako pratimo trendove i tokove i da smo itekako dorasli zadatku. I u tom smislu mislim da je i sa te malo šire priče ovo velika stvar.
Učesnici ovogodišnje konferencije pokazuju da filozofija ima mnogo toga da ponudi današnjoj nauci, a Beograd je ove jeseni bio tačka susreta i otvaranja mogućnosti za dalju saradnju.